That was the governor of Borno State, Malam Kashim Shettima. For our conversation here today, I'm very pleased to have with me the Senior Special Advisor to the President on Internally Displaced Persons, Dr. Mariam Masha. Ma'am, thank you so much for coming. Right. The Vice President of the Presidential Committee on the Northeast Initiative, Malad Tijani Tumsa, is also here. Thank you, sir, for joining us. The General Officer Commanding 7th Division, Nigerian Army, Brigadier, based here in Maiduguri, Brigadier General Abdul Malik Bulamabiu is also with us. Thank you so much, sir, for coming. And finally, Ms. Idayat Hassan, who is the Director, Center for Democracy and Development. Ma'am, thank you for joining us. Okay. I want to start this conversation actually by looking to the military. We always look at the military in terms of this conflict as the protectors. But we heard the governor in that interview talking about his views that displacement is perhaps the most traumatic thing that victims of Boko Haram have faced. What has been the impact of Boko Haram on the military?
The military, maybe I need to lay a small background that we must have the understanding of the military being part and parcel of the society. Therefore, whatever that affects the society also affects the military. Yes, the military, we are under oath to defend, to protect the Nigerian state as it is. And therefore, there's no commitment in that direction. That is too much. But it's just to say that, yes, we have been engaging in this war for long. So certainly there are also impacts that affects us. There are a lot to talk about psychological traumas, our families. And in any case, like I said, the military is part and parcel of the society. It is not just restricted to the man in the barracks. The man in the barracks belongs to certain families out there. He has his uncles, he has his relations, wards here and there. So whatever that happens negatively, as it is, also impacts on the military.
Are there issues that the military face specifically that perhaps civilian populations that are going through this conflict don't face? So are there peculiar challenges to sort of being part of the army in an area that is going through this sort of trouble?
Yeah, challenges, impacts are universal, so to say, but also they are also specific to some certain organizations and some groups and entities. So for us in the military, first and foremost, if you ask my wife, she will now tell you that, look, that I've been out there, for instance, for quite a long, and she's missing me. And that is also, it's also an impact. So also the children. We've been in this business for upwards of 8 to 9 years now that we're talking about. Okay, so your absence at home may also have a negative impact on the family.
Okay.
But like I said, the military, of course, that is our calling. But for our dependents, for our families, for our wards, for our relations, certainly there are impacts on them too.
Dr. Masha, your job means you have, if you like, the bird's eye view of sort of the issues that this region continues to face as a result of the Boko Haram conflict. So from your perspective, what are sort of the main issues that continue to be the biggest challenges that this community is facing?
I think beyond what the direct impact of the conflict itself, we're looking at how do we begin to move forward. And one of the challenges that we continue to face is around coordination of efforts from different levels, whether it's the civil society, the government itself, private sector, anyone who is working in this region in an attempt to and attempt to alleviate the situation that is being faced. And I think that's the one thing that I can point out.
Now, the thing is this, for someone like me who sort of comes into Maiduguri and leaves, I kind of have a slightly better understanding than the average man on the street of the complexities of issues you're talking about. But often, the average Nigerian doesn't really understand the scale of the troubles that we're talking about. And so, if you could you explain to us what the issues are?
Okay.
In a bit more detail.
Okay, and that's the issues. If we look at the conflict itself and the impact it's had on the region, and we're looking at displacement, and it's really forced displacement, people having to move, not because they want to, but because of the conflict, because of the terrorists, it's really terror, and people have had to flee to survive. So they're faced with a lot of challenges, from access to food, to water, to shelter, to leaving everything behind. Loss of family members, loss of friends, businesses, property. You have people living in camps. It's not what they would want to, where they would have anticipated finding themselves. You also have people who are living in host communities, and that also comes with its own challenges of security, challenges of within a host community, the social services become stretched. So you'd find health facilities which maybe could cater to, for sake of conversation, 50 people. Now it's having to take care of 200. So of course you begin to have also tensions within those communities, as receptive as you'd want to be. It's now, it's clamor, it's survival. Schools as well, education. You have, most times the schools are turned into camps. They're the largest in terms of space and where people can be accommodated. So what you also find is that there's a disruption. Those who've been displaced by force, the education for the children is stopped. And where they then move to, you also have education being halted because they now have to, because of the influx. So that community also suffers. So you have, it's a number of challenges. You also have, damage to physical infrastructure, social services, but more importantly is also psychosocial trauma that people are faced with. And I'm not sure this is something we can measure today. It's something that would have far longer reaching impact. You have people who not just being faced with, maybe having a family member killed right in front of you. The manner in which that was done is one thing, because people lose people all the time, but the manner in which that was done is one, and the destruction that you find also. So these also have far-reaching impacts on people. And in a bid to address this, it's important to understand what the drivers are. And what the drivers are, particularly in our own environment, and understanding that would now help us in how we address.
I want to quickly turn to Malam Tumsa. You run the Presidential Committee on the NEast Initiative. In doing your work, what are the issues that you are addressing directly? Are you looking at only the impact of the conflict, or are you also charged with looking at the underlying causes? I'm trying to get a sense of how you function and what you're doing.
Yeah, I speak to coordination. The Presidential Committee on Northeast Initiative was created to function as a coordinating body for all the interventions that are coming into the Northeast. Now, before...
Local and international?
Local, international, and community-based. Now, before the elections of 2015, there was multiplicity of interventions going on, all good-natured, however, they were not coordinated. So, for instance, you find NGOs, government bodies, all intervening in one locality within one local government, while other areas are not served appropriately. So the Presidential Committee, as a first step, brought in all the plans of various interveners, so to speak, and the state governments in bringing out a plan that speaks to better coordination and also prioritization of activities going on. This is what we call the Buhari Plan, and that is what is guiding the intervention and work of the PCNI.
Are you essentially policing donors? and civil society, and also the work of people like Dr. Masha?
No, we work in conjunction with Dr. Masha, the military, and everybody that has the business of intervening in the Northeast. Now, there are so many moving parts in such a conflict and the after effects of this sort of conflict. What we need to realize is that before now, the Northeast itself, and Borno included, of course, has had very low indices for human development. So we are now trying to build back better from the destruction that has happened. It's not going to happen over a very short period of time, but we look forward to participation by everybody.
Let me bring in Diet here. So every time we sit down and talk about the Northeast, people tell you that if you look at the UN Index for Human Development, the Northeast is sort of at the bottom, and this is globally, alongside, I think, places in Chad and parts of, I think, Niger. And so people talk to you about these human indices that are basically show ingrained poverty. And it's been said again and again that in order to sort of take care of this conflict, you cannot allow that sort of standard of living to continue. In your work, how easy is it to tackle these issues during an ongoing conflict? Because this conflict is not over.
I think it's very important that whatever our intervention will be, we have to start talking in terms of counting the cost. And we cannot count the cost of the insurgency without actually going back to what the human development indices are. Previously, even you have the literacy rate for women at oscillating between 88% and 92% here in the Northeast. Now, when you place it on value and you look at it, 9 years of insurgency, like 6 years of people completely out of school. What will that be if we have to put it by metrics?
So, but what does it mean? Because, you know, we see
what it means.
Developmental organizations and civil organizations talk numbers. And sometimes a lot of these things go over people's heads because, okay, so why does it matter if a child is out of school or if a woman gets married at the age of 13 or 9? How is that connected to Boko Haram?
It's connected, and I think it's a bigger problem because one of the one of the underlying factors is inequality that brought us to where we are today in terms of the insurgency. In reality, what it means is that somebody who is in the Southwest and having access to education compared to somebody who is in the Northeast are not at par at all. So it means a child who is in Lagos attending school is like 70% compared to somebody who is in 5-10%. Now, when we talk even in terms of peaceful coexistence as a nation, how does that place us? Just even regional dimension. From a regional point of view, it creates more challenges. Now, the reality also is that several of our interventions that we are all engaged in, either as the PCNI, as the Child Trust, at CDD, we do not do humanitarian, we talk in terms of fixing cohesion, are not directly or immediately able to address some of these challenges. When we talk in terms of statistics, the first question we should even ask is, how many children are out of school? And how many have we been able to return to school? Then counting the cost, how many years do we need to redress this? If you ask me, I would say maybe like 50 years.
Okay, I'm going to have to stop you quickly because I have to take a break. Don't go away. Welcome back. You are watching The Core, coming to you from the Northeast Children Trust Learning Center in Maiduguri, Nigeria. You can join the conversation on our social media handles, Twitter at Channels TV or at Kadria Ahmed. On YouTube is at Channels Web. You should also use the hashtag NGTheCore. You can also follow us on Facebook at Channels Forum. Now, Malam Tunsa, before the break, Idayat was suggesting that the interventions that are taking place are not exactly designed to fully do the things that they should do, which is to sort of put the Northeast back on the path of sustainability and dealing with the sort of human development indices that are known to be pointers to the fact that the society is doing well and it's on its way to essentially building communities that will thrive.
Exactly. Hidayat has hit on a point that is basically to do with societal structure. Now, in all that we do, that we have done so far, like I said earlier, the issue of this insurgency is dynamic and has many moving parts. But basically, you have to treat all needs based on the human needs initially.
So you can't do a hierarchy of needs kind of thing and decide?
You have a hierarchy of needs which addresses first the hunger, shelter, and then, attendant things like education. Although we are doing all these interventions and we are helping other people deliver such interventions, you will recall this school, for instance, is something that takes care of the outpouring of some part of the conflict. This project is targeted to house 2,000 orphans, which is a fallout, and it gives them education. They would have been out of school without this facility. So it's an ongoing thing, and you have to address all these parts simultaneously.
Dr. Masha, the difficulty again is that we are saying you want to do a hierarchy of needs. People are hungry, you want to give them food. But the point that I think Hidayat was trying to make, and which I have heard again and again experts make, is that beyond those immediate interventions, if you do not address some of the underlying causes of poverty, if you're not able to educate children, if you're not able to provide skills so that people have the ability to earn a living, then essentially you're going to have a conflict that will go on in perpetuity, because the conditions that make terrorism attractive to our young men and young women will still continue to exist.
Yes, I agree with you. One of the things that we did, though, and maybe we didn't project this loudly enough, was in putting together all the interventions that we've done. The first thing we did coming in was to try to understand what the situation is to begin with, beginning with what the damages are, what the needs are. The damages and the needs might be different. If I loosely give an example, say, this city has been damaged significantly and people move from here to another city. So you find that in a city where the damage was minimal, yes, that's what we have. But the needs in the city where damages were more might be less because people have migrated somewhere else to seek, better life and all that. So we did an assessment across the 6 Northeast states to understand damages and needs, and in a bid to come up with a collective vision and a strategy. How do we begin to address? And we had 3 pillars that came from that. And we had peace building and social cohesion. And that's everything, including building trust in the government, starting from the local government all the way up. Issues around social justice, transitional justice, human rights issues. We also had cross-cutting issues. We were also able to identify the damages in physical and social infrastructure. And the last one was to look at the economic impact. How do we restore livelihood? How do we stimulate the microeconomy? So these have been identified, and this leads into what the PCNI is doing, because this plan, this research helped in developing a plan that is now being used. And in implementing that plan, what they have been able to do is also, and I'm speaking on his behalf now, is to prioritize and sequence the intervention. So it's a bite at a time because we can't get to everything at the same time, but we're able to prioritize interventions, sequence them by state. So what you'd find in Borno will be different from what you'd find in Adamawa, different from what you find in Yobe, because the needs are also different. But importantly is the humanitarian need is still there. We need to cater to that. So food, shelter, we need to cater to that, health, while we also look at the longer terms. And some of these interventions have actually begun.
Okay. Now, I'm assuming that these interventions happen where you have relative peace, where the army has gone in and done the job of clearing that. Now, they have, I think, probably a better picture than all of us sitting here of what is going on outside the sort of urban areas where, you know, you can begin to see things taking shape. And so I'd like to ask you, what is the, if you like, countryside like right now? Because we hear that Boko Haram has been degraded and that the conflict is more or less over. However, every once in a while we hear army has been ambushed, 30-something people killed, guerrilla strikes, all of that. What is the real situation regarding security? And how do you, as the army, deal with communities when you get into an area where there has been an attack and there are civilians, but you have maybe suspects as well?
Thank you. Well, just like you raised, maybe you hear that there was an attack or whether the Boko Haram has not been degraded. There's no doubt about that. They have been substantially degraded. But we need to also understand that war against terrorism is one that cannot be cleaned in one sweep. It's not an issue that can just be brought to end abruptly. You know, nations that have had the feel of terrorism will tell you better that years and years they are still on it. But out there, yes, we have been able to stabilize, and also you needed to look at it from where we're coming from. Some years back, you know where the situation is, that people cannot even move out of the metropolitan. Even within the metropolitan, there were challenges. So for us, we have substantially degraded them, and of course, some isolated cases. It's like the kick of the dying man. So attacking soft targets and occasionally trying to loot. For example, you discover that some of those minor attacks and what have you do occur maybe when the NGOs are about to distribute their foods and what have you. So they come in to scavenge for foods and loot foods here and there. So those are some of the isolated cases that happens here and there.
Let me ask you about the information we're getting about a division between Boko Haram. We've heard that there is now Islamic ISWAP, the Islamic State of West Africa, which is sort of now aligned with the faction of Boko Haram. And then we have the Boko Haram led by Shekau. How has that division impacted on the conflict?
Well,
if it has.
Well, analysts and watchers can look at the entire strata of the Boko Haram as having several divisions here and there. Those are not issues to this. All we know is that the Nigerian state is at war with the Boko Haram terrorists. And whatever is their divisions or what have you, our business is to ensure that they are totally, ejected out of the Nigerian territory, and so that we will now restore peace into this country, so that people will be able to go about their normal business. Yes, we've had it also that there is a Shakau faction, there is an Albanawi faction, there could be some other factions and what have you, but it is not the issue of the factionalization. All we know is that the bottom line and the line and the base is that there is Boko Haram, and therefore the Boko Haram as a terrorist group are at war with the Nigerian state. It is not the military as some of the perceptions of some people that have. So ours, it is to clear them totally. Whosoever that is against the Nigerian state, it is our business to lead collective efforts in trying to address those issues.
And at some point, I think I will come back to you to talk about how you're doing that and some of the allegations raised around, the activities that is alleged that the Nigerian army carries out. But I'd like to start involving the audience, particularly people who've experienced this trouble, because it's well and good, for us to sit here talking about what people are experiencing. I'd like to hear directly from people who are victims of Boko Haram. I know we have a few people who are internally displaced, and I'd like to hear their stories and their perspectives in terms of what has been going on, what is being done, and whether their needs are actually being addressed. Because we got the people here who can solve the problems or who are trying to solve the problems. Perhaps we can begin with you. Yes.
Good morning, all. My name is Abdurrahman Zanna. I came from Bama local government, and also I'm IDP, that is internally displaced person.
So you fled Bama to
Yeah,
Maiduguri?
Yes.
And where are you staying at the moment?
Yeah, at the moment.
Are you in a camp or you're with family?
Yeah, I'm in the camp so far.
Okay.
Why? Because I'm in the camp. Staying in the town is very rare. Why? Because all what we are doing at home, we are no longer doing here. So that is why we decide to stay in the camp in order to reduce the cost. And we are staying in the camp. So
what were you doing before the insurgents chased you out? What was your job?
Okay, I am a businessman, doing business before they chase us out.
Selling, trading?
Yeah, I'm doing trading.
Okay.
So before they chase us out. So we are in the camp so far now, and government are doing their best, and non-governmental organizations also so far they are doing their best, and also the military too. And what we need here now is the reconstruction of the buildings that were liberated by these insurgents. We need to have it. Many people have returned.
So what are you saying? You want to go back home?
Yeah, we want to go back home. And we want to go back home to continue with our normal life as before. And for us to go back home, we have to get the feast before being there. Okay. And the military are doing their best now, and we thanks to them so far. Before, you're not even going out of the metropolis, but you can now go to Bama, you can go to Banki, you can fast to Goza, wherever you want to go, you can go.
So if that's the case, why haven't you gone back? If Bama is now safe and you want to go home, what is stopping you from going back?
What stopped me for not going home now is that the level of the business over there is no longer to my to my expectation. Right. So I engage in some certain businesses here. Okay. So I would like when the time business to boost there, so I want to go back and join the people.
Yeah. This raises the issue of the impact of the insurgency on the economy of the Northeast, and the fact that, you know, it wasn't a very affluent society to begin with, but this insurgency has further damaged people's abilities to earn a living. So farmers are not farming, traders are not trading, petty traders, you know, all of that. What is the outlook in terms of the economy of the Northeast based on the sort of work you're doing, Malam Musa?
Okay, I take Bama for instance as a genuine and present example. Now, the state government has done quite a few things in Bama to encourage return. That included replenishing and renovating personal homes, while the PCNI and its partners have recovered all the public structures in Bama. And currently, the General Hospital in Burma is going to be commissioned in about 2 weeks' time, fully equipped and also ready to receive more people. As I speak to you, more people are going back to Burma. And like he rightly said, the population is picking up, but slowly. This is not going to be a lights off, lights on approach. It has to be organic in nature. Now, this applies to a lot of communities that are in Borno State. But if you speak to communities in Yobe State, where there is no longer any single camp, all camps have been closed in Yobe, only one remains in Adamawa, we are concentrating on livelihood support to females returning to continue with businesses, males to continue with farming. Now, this is all possible because of the security of the area. The military have done pretty well in terms of liberating a lot of areas. As they liberate areas, challenges come out. For instance, right now, the PCNI is in active assessment with the military, Federal Ministry of Health, and on instruction from the Vice President to assess the level of malnutrition in those areas that are deemed to be inaccessible.
Well, I'm told half of something like 755 health centers in the Northeast have been destroyed, and that children, I think the numbers of malnourished children, I think across Nigeria is almost 2 million, although I don't have the numbers. I don't know if you diet, you have the numbers at all. No, you don't. Okay. So there's an assessment taking place.
Right now, yes.
Okay, in order to... let me ask you, Dr. Mariam, if I look at a few things here, and on the issue of building people back and enabling them to sort of start their businesses, I've heard a number being bandied around. Government saying they've spent something like 6.2 or $6.1 million on the Northeast. What has that money gone to, if that number is correct? And if it is not correct, what is the right number?
Okay, in terms, when you say government?
Well, there was a recent, document that was released. I think it was the Minister of Budget and Planning that said something like 6.1, I think it was, $6.1 million has been spent on rehabilitating the Northeast.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get a sense of where did that money go to? Is it a question of just rebuilding infrastructure? Is it a question of providing people with seed money so they can start their businesses again? Or is it just security, equipping the army and making sure that they can go and fight?
Okay, I think the figure you're referring to came out of the Humanitarian Response Plan for 2018.
Yes.
Yes, and it's $6.4 billion, if I'm right, billion dollars. But that figure actually speaks to the total budget of all the states in the Northeast. Monies have been spent on the military and also federal allocation to the Northeast. So it's not just the federal government's money, but it was a collation, if you'd like,
an aggregation
of total monies in the Northeast itself. So not specific to humanitarian alone, or not specific to development alone, but everything that is being spent in the region from the state government and the federal government, including allocation to the military as well.
Okay. Now, Lafarge Africa, the cement manufacturer that operates, in the Northeast, their managing director recently, Guillem Roux, said basically that his business has lost something like 2.5 billion because it could not meet the sale margin due to insecurity in the Northeast, which suggests that even though we talk about this region as being quite poor, there was a degree of business that was still taking place before the advent of Boko Haram. And so the question of not just the displaced people, but also businesses that have sort of been out of business, what is the thinking around that of encouraging people to come back?
Right. I think once there is security, businesses will thrive, businesses will move. If I look back to how long I've been coming here, about 3 years now, and from then to now, I've seen Borno, Adama, Yobe. I've been around the region. Particularly here, which is the epicenter, I've seen quite a bit of development. People. The other day, I was having a discussion with someone who was taking his cats to the vet. And this is here in Maiduguri. We see a number of flights that have also increased in coming here. If it wasn't safe, people wouldn't be flying here. You can almost not get a ticket if you're trying to come into Borno, even hotels. So it's been a gradual process. There's still quite a bit to do, but work is going on, and businesses are slowly returning. Once people feel the sense of security and safety, businesses will begin to come back. There's a lot of rebuilding that is going on. There are homes, there are hospitals that's being done by the government, and these things require materials which are coming from somewhere. And so that is also, the microeconomy when it comes to the building, jobs being created, but also the big businesses as well. And once we can provide a safe environment, these things will begin to happen.
Now, private sector companies are involved in trying to see what they can contribute to rebuilding the Northeast. And one of the people, for example, that is involved is the chairman of the Northeast Trust, Mr. Jim Ovia. I sat down with him for a conversation to try and get a sense of why the private sector felt the need to get involved with the problems of the Northeast.
Children Trust Fund was set up after the vice president had visited that area. And he was overwhelmed by the fact that thousands, hundreds, thousands, and maybe millions of children, very young age children who should ideally be in school, were not in school. They were not being taken care of, they were not being catered for. And he felt that something needed to be done. And quite a number of us were invited by Mr. Vice President to lend our support to this noble idea. That's how we all got involved. It wasn't just myself alone, and a number of my other colleagues and a number of other entrepreneurs were involved in this project.
Now, increasingly, we live in a country which, is kind of fractured, and you hear a lot of talk about North and South, Muslim, Christian, rather unfortunate aspect of, our environment right now. But you're not from the North. Indeed, you're not a Muslim. You're from the South, and I think you're a Christian. Why do you feel that this conflict, which in many ways is not directly involving the area of Nigeria where you come from, is something that you need to be part of providing a solution to?
It doesn't really matter. Human beings are human beings, whether they are white, they are black, they are Indians, they are Asians. It didn't really matter. Human beings are human beings. Therefore, the religion has no role to play with regard to when you want to display your compassion, when you want to display your support, when you want to display your philanthropic efforts, contributions to ensure that your fellow human beings, they survive certain crises. You are not going to be thinking about religion, class, poor, rich, and all that. That's not going to be a factor to consider at all. In fact, we never even consider that as a matter of fact when we're making our various strategic decisions of what we needed to do to execute the projects.
Now, you've built this first center. My understanding is that the trust wants to build at least another 9, similar to the ones that you've just executed. What is the strategy for doing that? Is this going to keep being driven by the private sector? Where are you planning to get the money to keep on executing this vision that the Vice President has?
Definitely, we're going to build many more of these. This very project has been executed in less than 1 year, and I'm very pleased to know or to say that some hundreds of those students, they had all moved into that center. They are having a normal life. They have water to drink. They have food to eat. They have accommodation. They have residential facilities, and they also are in school. Plus, there are also hospital facilities. There's no reason why we will not execute the additional 9 to make 10. We will do that. And if you look at the number, assuming one facility accommodates 1,000, then 10 will accommodate 10,000. 10,000 is a very little number if you consider how many persons have been displaced in Northeast. You're talking about definitely over 1 million.
It's about 2.1.
Now, thank you. If your statistics is right, if 2.1 million persons, children mostly, have been displaced, we're only catering for, from this number, only 10,000. We still have hundreds of millions more that cannot be taken care of. We do expect United Nations, that's why United Nations will come in to take care of some of the rest. And there will still be some that are left.
But presumably you think it is important that even if it is one person that you are able to look after, even if it's 10, even if then the 10,000, that this will make a difference to the region, and that's why you're doing it.
No, not only will make a difference to the region, those individuals will make a difference to the whole nation. Those individuals will influence certain powerful decisions in the future. And if they are well educated, they are wiser, they behave better, they can also influence lives that we ordinarily would not have access to. And I was also offered that some of the students, after they would have finished their primary school education, some numbers every year, I was already discussing with my board, if they're subject to them passing certain exam, we'll be able to hopefully bring them to James Hope College, which is also the school that we had been able to build in Delta State.
Yes. Welcome back. You are watching The Core, coming to you from Maiduguri in northeastern Nigeria, and we are in the premises of the Northeast Learning Center built by the Northeast Children Trust Fund. Now, before the break, we heard Mr. Jimovia talking about the scale of the problem and how they can make interventions that are significant, particularly for the young people involved, but which do not begin to address in sheer numbers what is required. He talked about UN intervention, and we've seen a myriad in coming here. For example, I've noticed there are a lot of donors from EU to the US, all sorts of people are here. Is this the way to rebuild the Northeast, in your view?
I think everybody is actually contributing his or her own quota, and the problem of Northeast is not the problem of Northeast, but the problem of Nigeria, really. And when we talk about victim, which was where we started, it's important to say that we are all victims. Working here for like a space of 8 years and knowing what happens between the donor community, the international, the government, and being helpless also brings into question. It makes you a victim that post-conflict we all have to deal with PTSD also. But I think it's important in the sheer number, post-traumatic distress syndrome, because we see a lot. We are in the interlands, we are in the cities, we are talking to people, we feel helpless ourselves in terms of what can I put on the table. I don't do humanitarian, but I must build social cohesion. I must talk about how people will live beyond Boko Haram, really. So that comes into place. But when you look in terms of the orphan, the recent figure by the governor puts it at over 50,000. Those are the ones they have documented. There are more than that. And we have a school, this very good initiative, which takes possibly 2,000. So it means we still have 48,000 minus the undocumented orphans. When you drive around the city of Maiduguri, we see children. They are in droves. They are all there. And the fact that they are unaccompanied, they have no guardian, it also creates a stress for us in terms of what we do. For instance, UNICEF is doing good work. They are talking and dealing with children who are even involved in armed conflict specifically. There are lots of interventions, but these interventions must also be rooted in the local context.
And let me bring in, because we do have a number of people in the studio.
Let me talk in terms of just a bit of what the local context should actually be. It should be the culture, the ethos, and the tradition of the people of this region.
Yeah, I'd like to bring in the audience, people of Maiduguri, anybody, and I wouldn't mind a volunteer. Can someone talk to us about whether they feel the interventions that are taking place have been designed in a way that they would take into account local sensibilities and they will succeed? Anybody that can talk to us about that? Okay, there's a gentleman at the back. Sir, please tell us your name, yeah?
Don't stand.
You can sit down, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Barrister Jetu Kuda. I'm the legal advisor of the civilian JT. Well, I've had the question asked, but before going directly to questions, it actually touches the core of the body I'm representing. We know as a fact that the presidential initiative which Alhaji Tumsa is representing has quite a lot of touches on us in view of the fact that as of now, as I'm talking to you, we have lost about 800 plus of the civilian JTF who died actively while confronting Boko Haram. Their families, wives, widows, and their kids are there, cannot even go to school. And we...
Is that because they're in areas where schools are not fully back, or what is stopping them from going to school?
Well, the family cannot support them. You know, let me tell you, with the coming of the civilian JTF, up to this moment, it is only with the gratuitous opportunity being given by the Borno State government, who, among the strength of the 26,000 plus of the civilian JTF, about 1,800 and something have been trained in a scheme called Boyes, and they are being paid 15,000 naira monthly. In addition to that, we have of recent one program designed by UNDP, and about 2,000 plus of our boys were trained in JOS. But that one, they have just received a basic training on how to continue with their lives. In addition to that, recently the Borno State government brought out a program, what we call Neighborhood Watch, where in each ward about 100 of the civilian JTF were employed to keep a watch, something like more or less community policing. We are at the end of the month, they are being given 10,000 naira each. Apart from that, the family of those I told you, they cannot go to school because the widows cannot afford to pay their school fees.
Okay, so I have to stop you there. Let me come back to the two people who in many ways represent the government on this panel. Are there like specific policies that are geared towards sorting out combatants, people who've been involved in defending the security of this country, that are so the civilian JTF, and maybe we can also talk about the provisions for the army. I mean, not too long ago, we saw a demonstration here in Maiduguri where policemen, took to the streets because they were very, very upset about not being taken care of, and their welfare was, problematic. So is there a policy at all around those sort of issues that you contribute or you work towards, since you know the full picture?
Well, actually, there are a variety of policies that are resident in different organizations. For instance, the Army has a policy to deal with issues that surround such events within the Army and within other areas that they are pursuing. Now, I have to also come back to the issue of the orphans. Now, this initiative is a very, very, very good initiative that has a vision to do 9 more. But like Jim Ovia says, it's only a drop in the ocean. A lot of partners are also doing a variety of things in terms of taking care of orphans, including foster care. And this has also taken quite a bit of orphans within the period of time. But a lot needs to be done.
So like Hidayat pointed out, and I noticed it as well, driving around Maiduguri, there's hordes of children begging, many of them unaccompanied. What is the situation with those children?
Those children historically have been part of Maiduguri for a while. There are those that you call Almajre, and then there are orphans. There's a difference there.
Dr. Mariam, should we then be optimistic about the recovery of the Northeast if you require 9 billion and you've got a government clearly that has responsibilities not just to the Northeast but to other parts of Nigeria in terms of sort of the way they have to share out the limited resources that they have? Can we get that sort of money to do what we need to do?
While we might not be able to get that sort of money at the same time or even be able to get that sort of money, I think, I'm certainly optimistic. I've seen changes, I've seen progress. And I think beyond just money, if there is the will, there's the understanding and there's the will, we can do a lot more than just waiting. Sometimes you find that even the more resources you have, the more confusion it is. People then start having, more lofty ideas and, things that become unrealistic. But sometimes when you don't have, it puts you in a position to actually sit back and think and prioritize better. So I'm optimistic because I have seen, in spite of everything, I've seen the challenges, I've seen the resilience in people. In putting together this intervention where we are now, for us it's a proof of concept of what can happen. And it's also a proof of concept around what coordination can mean and what working with minimal resources can also achieve. And it's in terms of when you talked about designing interventions that actually meets the needs of the local community. This was actually a demonstration of that because we're able to work with the local community to say, okay, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of culture, what can we do to meet that, but also building back better, if you'd like, but not taking away from what is normal or what is considered normal in the environment, and working with limited resources, but also leveraging on the strengths of the people. What do you do? What do you do well? What can you contribute here, for instance, and how can we put this kind of a place up that will still meet the needs of people? So I think I'm definitely optimistic, and I won't look at the numbers. It's important as a guide But it's more important to say, okay, what problems are we facing directly, and how can we address
I want to take a quick opportunity to talk about that a little bit, but I want to talk about, because we were talking about looking after civilian JTF, I'd like to ask Brigadier General what the policy is specifically looking after soldiers who either get wounded or who die in the line of duty, and what happens with their families.
Yeah, beautiful. There are a lot of policies in place to deal with this kind of issues. Very robust one. We have the life policy insurance with us, and a lot of others. We have the Nigerian Army security insurance that is also paid to families of the bereaved. We have the benevolent fund and several other types of policies to really deal with this. So for us, yes, we have policies that are there to take care of such issues.
Now, a few years ago, we had incidents of, I think, mutiny, by junior officers in the Nigerian Army. There were stories of them being really upset with a commanding officer. And there were allegations that the reason was their allowances were not getting to them, etc.
Things free consistently. Now, that happens in a situation like that of a displacement in Borno and other areas and in camps. That you have to design methods of weaning people off of these free gifts. You cannot also deny that there is a need indeed for this food in a lot of cases. Where you are able to separate it is the fine line that you have to look for. But a lot of cultural changes occur when a population as large as 2.4 million is initially displaced and forced to live in camps, which is something very alien to them. And you have donor partners bringing in food and other non-food items to them to distribute to them, which is, for all practical purposes, very, very good.
It's well-intentioned.
It's well-intentioned. But then, there are fallouts. The camps now begin to create new cultures, new culture of anticipation, culture of entitlement, culture of dependency. So the government, and that is what we are trying to do from the office of the Vice President and under the leadership of the President, to have programs that continue to place kids back to school. You have people return to livelihoods, particularly the women in this conflict who have borne the brunt of a lot of this conflict, and also resettle the men into businesses that they can do. But before then, we have to create ways of managing this dependency syndrome. And I don't think we should throw out all the babies with the bathwater. There are those that require the food genuinely because they have not been able to farm in their places of residence.
Okay, we're lucky, just a minute, we're lucky we've got the Honorable Commissioner for Information for Borno State here, and I'd like to bring him in specifically to talk about the issue of educating these young children, particularly the ones that we see on the streets. Do you have the capacity with the new schools that you're building now to sort of take every child off the street? And is it a question of that they're not willing? And if that's the case, do you need a policy that makes education compulsory? Or is it a question of capacity because you are scaling up gradually because you are coming out of a conflict?
Very much. I think...
Oh, sorry, I forgot to tell them your name. I did say you were the Commissioner of Information.
Yeah, Commissioner of Home Affairs, Commissioner of Culture, and my name is Mohammed Blam. And I think to answer your question, I would like to see a situation where we can adequately and sufficiently address this problem at the post-conflict level. Because like Madam Tumsa...
Now, when is that going to be? I mean, post-conflict is a bit... If you still got guerrilla warfare, you still got attacks.
Yeah.
Are you ever really going to reach a situation?
I'm not suggesting that we're going to fold our arms and wait until the conflict is over. because like the general said, it's not something you are going to just switch off and say it's over abruptly. It never happens that way, you know. But for us to fully address the problem, there has to be some level of some robust semblance of peace. But nonetheless, as you say, we're already building a lot of schools across the state. You know, we're building a lot of schools. We're addressing the issue of orphans and widows, and we have policies in place. I remember the governor in 2015, during his inaugural address, made a pronouncement to the effect that education will be free and compulsory. You know, we've not been able to fully implement that policy because the conflict has been going on. You know, even if you say it's free and compulsory, I mean, it's just lip service because nobody, when the conflict is over, you're not going to get children into schools. So this is a problem. Taking off kids from Maiduguri, I have to admit that many of these kids actually you see on the streets live with their parents, even here in Maiduguri, apart from the Almajiris. We have a lot of hundreds of, if not, I mean, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of kids.
So in a place like Maiduguri, which
Yes.
seems to be, you know, relatively safe, we've
Yes.
driven in, there's a lot of rehabilitation. You can see that this is a town that is being rebuilt. What is the difficulty in implementing that policy to begin with, at least in the capital city?
Well, first of all, the infrastructure, most of them are just being put in place. If you make a pronouncement and you don't have the infrastructure to support it, you're only wasting your time. So, but going forward, many of these schools, some of them are going to start admitting students this very month. We are in September. You know, many of the schools are still under construction, many of them. But the few ones that we have completed, like the renovated primary and secondary schools, you know, in fact, most of the primary and secondary schools in Maiduguri have been renovated. Many of them now have, I mean, the intake, you know, the student population has ballooned since then. We have...
Now, schools are not just infrastructure. I have to go to break. That's why I'm rushing you a little bit.
Yes.
I understand the numbers are that some 2,275 teachers roughly have been killed since the start of this conflict. So where are the teachers coming from that are going to be in these classrooms teaching the students once you sort of build the schools?
With respect to that, I have to admit that we have a work cut out for us. That's the fact of the matter. Even without these teachers being killed, the fact has always been that most of our teachers had been poorly trained, you know, and so we need to, you know, now that these schools are being put in place, we're doing our best. We're beginning to look at the question of training and retraining teachers and also employing more of them. Just this month, the governor has given a directive that 1,000 more teachers be recruited. I know that that is still just a drop in the ocean. We need a lot more of them, but it's something that is going to take a pretty long time. You know, it's not something that will happen overnight.
Thank you. It's time for another quick break. Please don't go away. Welcome back. You are watching The Core, which is coming to you from Maiduguri, the capital of Borno State. And we are talking about the people of the Northeast and the impact of the insurgency, which has now been on for about 9 years. Now you can join the conversation on our social media handles, Twitter @Channels TV or @Kadria Ahmed. On YouTube is @Channels Web. Please use the hashtag NGTheCore. You can also follow us on Facebook @Channels Forum. Now, it's very easy for people like me who are journalists to sort of fly into a place, talk to a few people, and delude ourselves into thinking we understand, you know, the situation with people. So we have local journalists who've sort of very vast in this conflict because they've been reporting for about 9 years. And I'd like to get a few of them involved in this conversation, perhaps starting with some of the most controversial issues when you talk to people about displaced populations, the issue of abuse. and by caregivers, as well as, allegations of abuse by the army. What is your experience in sort of covering this conflict? What have you seen? What have people told you?
My name is Ismail Alfa.
Please, you can sit down. You don't have to stand up.
My name is Ismail Alfa Ibrahim. I write for Associated Press AP. I've been on ground right from the onset, and what we get from most of the victims are that sometimes if they open up, stigmatization is one thing, and secondly, in most cases where you try to get them to open up.
Please bring your microphone a bit closer to your mouth.
Yeah, so when you try to let them open up, they view you with suspicion. And that suspicion is because maybe they feel if you report the issue, the perpetrators will come back to them. So these are some of the issues we face.
So are you saying that there are indications of impunity, where people are actually doing things and getting away with it and nobody's getting punished, and so people fear the backlash of reporting crimes?
Yeah, that was at the initial stage.
Right.
But in recent time, they have picked up and they are opening up, telling us their own side of the story. And in other cases...
So what are they telling you? I'm interested in hearing the specifics.
Well, what they tell us is that is it in the camp or is it when they came out of their affected places, or?
Just whichever one you think is significant, both, actually.
Yeah, about the insurgents, they open up very well.
Right.
And sometimes where they have lack of food and other...
what about the caregivers? What about the Nigerian army, for example? What are they saying about how the army treats them when they go into a place?
Well, at the initial stage, it was horrible. That's the truth. It was horrible, and we also did not have smooth relationship with the military at the initial stage. We were seen differently from the purpose for what we went to get the information on.
Okay.
And in recent time, in the last few years, we've had a very, very understanding military civil relationship.
Okay, let me bring in the Brigadier General here. So I know the report issued by Amnesty International has been totally dismissed, by the Nigerian military. And yet, when you speak to people who are on the ground, they insist that again and again, there are people telling them that the conduct of the army isn't always the way it's supposed to be. And you get people who are abusing their authority. Are you refusing to accept this because you think there's a degree of liability? Or is it that genuinely you don't care about the fact that your army might actually be committing human rights abuses against civilians?
No. Far from that. The military, we are very professional. And whatever we're doing it in a very professional manner to the standards as expected of best practices. If any person or anybody or any organization raises an allegation, of course, under the current leadership of the military, we have had, a robust desk officers on human rights.
In the case of Amnesty International, you didn't even try to investigate what they said. You just dismissed it outright. You said it wasn't possible.
How will you conclude that it was not investigated? Somebody said
because
something.
Your statement did not say we investigated and we found it not to be true. What you said in your statement was that Amnesty is fomenting trouble, more or less. Those were your words. And so there was no indication that any effort was made to actually see whether there was any validity to the allegations that were made.
Except you know our internal mechanisms. Then, of course, you also stand to say it that way.
Well, realistically, in a conflict like this, is it possible for you to guarantee that 100% your men will be behaving in the way that they are supposed to? Because it doesn't seem like it's a realistic thing to do.
Well, not. We are trained. We are expected to operate based on our training as very professional people. Yes, there could be one or two challenges here and there, And that is why we have internal mechanisms to address those kind of things. So if there are issues, we said, let us know, and we will investigate. And those perpetrators will be sanctioned.
How many have you sanctioned in the last 9 years? Since the beginning of this conflict, have you sanctioned any of your men for conduct against civilians that's not supposed to have taken place in 9 years?
Oh, yes. Haven't you heard of our trials, our general court martials here and there?
We've heard about court martials for disobedience to, the hierarchy.
That is what you
We've
choose.
not heard anything.
That is what you choose to listen to. But that is not the issue. There are a lot of things. There are several other cases.
And can you tell us about some of them?
The Nigerian military law only anchors on the issue of mutiny. We have a codified rules. And of course, any issue that came up is being investigated. And perpetrators are also sanctioned. And there are several of it. I may not be able to give you off the slip the data, but they are there. But like I told you, as I speak to you, there are court martials ongoing with different types of cases.
Now, part of I think the lack of nuance that takes place when we discuss conflict of this nature, and particularly in the way it relates to people who provide security, is that often we don't see them as people. And so the issues of perhaps the trauma that they also personally face isn't taken into account, and the impact that can have on their ability to empathize and relate to civilians, because they see so much. So my question is regarding post-traumatic stress syndrome, which is, I know, common among soldiers, for example. What is the experience of the Nigerian Army around that, and how do you deal with people who are exposed to this sort of trauma and may end up with these psychological issues?
Well, the engagement is ongoing. Within the periods that we have been engaged in the fight against this terrorism, we have measures to really take care of such things if they, raises their ugly faces. The military is
how many psychiatrists and psychologists do you have in Maiduguri, for example, catering to your command?
No. I cannot.
You don't want to discuss that?
No. That is not issue. That is not even issue to talk about. As if we're just expecting psychiatry issues here and there. Like I said,
because we care about the people who are protecting us, and we know that the standard globally is that these are issues, and the army that does well is the army that gets ahead of these issues and plans for them and makes sure that when they occur...
The military has systems in place to tackle these issues. It is also a recognition of the fact that it can occur. But to say how many or what is it, it is something that is likely to happen. And that is why we have provisions put in place so that if they do occur, they will be tackled in that manner. Okay. I think that is the point we should be able to appreciate for.
Okay, so I have very little time. A lot of people that want to talk. Let me start with the missus here. What we'll do is we'll take like 3 before we come back to the panel. So the madam here in front, the gentleman directly behind her, there's an IDP woman right there with the yellow scarf, and I'll get another soldier to speak as well. So this 4, and then we'll come back to you guys later. Yes, ma'am. So start here, please. Yes, thank you. So I will.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dr. Tina Olayemi. I am the Executive Director of Samaritan Care and Support Initiative. I partner with WFP FAO.
So you're a medical doctor?
No, I'm an academician.
Okay.
Talking about teachers, I discovered that we have a lot of schools coming up, thanks to the government. But unfortunately, we don't have people to manage the schools. We don't have teachers on ground. I wish they would do something that Kano State did when I was a small girl in Kano. They collected anybody that can teach, well qualified, and allowed them to work with them. Even train their children too. But immediately they had enough for the state. They now tell you, you can go back to your state. Thank you for your service.
So bringing people from outside?
Yes.
Okay.
But Borno is not doing that. Secondly, I discovered we have a lot of small children that we call foundational, we should be giving foundational education. They are there, but nobody is talking to them. I wanted to start a school in one of the communities where I work. I had over 500 children under age of 3 that we wanted to work with. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a safe space for them.
Okay, and we will get maybe the commissioner at some point to respond to that and how maybe the government can work with you. The gentleman behind her, I really don't have a lot of time, so I have to rush people. Yes.
Okay, so my name is Badlama Mustafa. I'm the Senior Liaison Advisor for the INGO Forum. The INGO Forum is an organization that coordinates all the INGOs within the state. I just want to address one issue. I think there's an allegation flying around here that has been left open, where saying the international community does not want the crisis to end.
Well, it wasn't that. That wasn't what was said. What was said was that the donors, for some reason, do not want people to return to their communities.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I want to address that. It's actually not the donors, it's the international community, the organizations that are working within the state that want that to not to happen. Why we are saying that is that presently we're in a humanitarian crisis. We're about to go into stabilization and a little bit of development. But what is happening is that if you carry people back to communities where we think are not very secure, you are creating another new humanitarian crisis, right, to prolong the issue. So that is one of the issues. Secondly, we also think that if you take people back to those communities, these people should be able to bring back their lives into stabilization so that they can recover economically. But what's happening is that we are taking them from a camp back to another camp, except in the new system where you take them back to their houses. But once you do that, you are not allowed to farm in those areas.
Right.
You are also going to stay in camps. And the garrison, that is the military that has done the trenches, you are not allowed to go beyond those trenches to farm. So we believe if you take these people back to those communities that are already garrison towns that look like a little bit of ordinary prison, the people will also be in another emergency.
Okay.
So we are moving to...
Very important point, and I think I'll get back to Malam Tumsa to tell us a little bit more maybe about what he knows on that. Yeah. There's a gentleman in uniform over there. Yes.
I'm Colonel Kingsley Samuel, the Deputy Director, Army Population 7 Division. I just want to lend my voice a little bit to my General Officer Commanding. You talked about it, we've been talking about the issue of human rights abuse. Yes, we know in every society, no society devoid of crime, and we have check mechanisms. Channels are here seated, the journalists are here seated. We have court martials. We've had cases where soldiers that have erred, the journalists have been brought to also observe the court proceedings, listen to verdicts. The same thing with human rights commissions. They've also been part of those courts, at least to show the human face of the military. Again, you talk about the issue of taking it as the issue of counseling. We have a psychological department in the theater command, as well as other psychiatrists in the field, at least to take charge. We cannot count numbers, so to speak, but for sure we know that in the long run, you're bound to have cases of trauma among soldiers because they engage in this issue of warfare. So all those aspects you're talking about are actually catered for. But like we say, it's a collective effort that must come into this crisis. It is not just the military. So
why do you oppose so much when Amnesty highlights some of these issues? Is it because you feel it's demoralizing to your people, or why? Because if you're saying that they do occur, but you are taking care of them, you're doing court martials, Amnesty is not lying there.
No. Okay, for fear of not wanting to take the word out of my ears, you heard him tell you, we investigate things, but you must give us the specifics. Who has committed that crime? If you don't put a finger to something, we can't just go blanket. But again, I could, that the issue of amnesty, we even had to come back to Borno State here. We actually investigated. We went around the accounts. We had to make videos. We checked. We went around, and we had evidence to show that we did not have cases of that. So you could also ask the journalist. I want to put it on record that your channel's reporter here has been part of the process, which can tell you.
Thank you, sir. There's a lady here. I think the girl in yellow, the lady in yellow. Yeah, there she is. Yes, you raised your hand, didn't you? Yes. Yeah.
Talking about...
you introduce yourself, please.
Okay. My name is Barrister Minta Yusuf. I am alumni of the NEast Intellectual Entrepreneurial Fellowship by NERI. So talking about countering the narratives, this fellowship has been able to bring about 45 youths, and through the use of social media.
Are you all youths that were affected by the conflict?
Yes, and now it's not talking about, these are youths from the Northeast, and then some other states in Nigeria. So we've been able to use the social media to counter narrative, because a lot of youth out there don't really know what is happening in Maiduguri or other Northeast region. So in the process, we've been able to come up with a book that was launched or that was publicly presented on the 29th of August in Abuja. It's called Ordinary Savior, and I'm a co-author of the book. And that book talked about the stories of what has been happening in Borno State or in the Northeast in general, and the solutions
So direct from the horse's mouth, there's a book out there that allows people to hear the stories directly.
Yes, and then there are stories from the Northeast.
Thank you. My name is Kabu Kabanda. I'm representing UNICEF. So I think the discussion has been very rich and touched a number of things which we could comment on, but maybe for lack of time, we'll prioritize on some. So basically, peace and security will determine what will happen after the conflict, or what can be better for the displaced people.
So what comes first? Do you focus on eradicating the poverty and the hopelessness so that, you are able to at least cut off the blood supply to Boko Haram, or do you focus on the security first?
Right, it's really chicken and egg. So to attack it very well, I will talk in terms of the nexus between humanitarian assistance and development. This has to happen, and it's not a matter of whether it should, it's really, it must happen. So to start with, there were underlying problems already, and we have talked about in this conversation, the human development indices. Things have to improve. There was a discussion on the equity, the North versus the other parts of the region. These are differences which can be very difficult to discuss, but if they are being recognized, it's a very good thing. The question is, what do we do about it? So education is really one of the key things. I listened intently when there was this beginning a discussion about local content linked to education. This, I think, needs to be discussed a little bit more between the authorities, the Northeastern champions in education, to really fully understand what does it mean when people are now telling us the local content is important. Okay? In terms of education, the Northeast will need also children who are trained as doctors or engineers. Just recently, one of the speakers talked about education is coming from other states to teach here before. If it worked before, maybe it can still work again. It needs to be looked at.
Thank you very much.
My name is Ibrahim Baumachina, staff PCNI. I want to ask, what are the necessary measures that the military are now taking to return back some of the returnees of IDPs that are not indigenous of Borno State to their various states?
Now that there is a policy, or now there is plan on ground to return people to the ancestral homelands, and these people are predominantly farmers.
What is being done?
How are they going to face these landmines?
Okay, that's a good question. Sir?
I am Michael Lugo, the right for this day. Mine is a suggestion. Many have alleged that the forced or persuaded return of IDPs to their homeland is like politically motivated, that they are being returned to a place that they cannot actually call home. Are we advised that we should not, based on playing politics, return people back home? There should be perfect peace before we return them back home.
Perfect peace, okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Jasper Okachukwu, and I work for CDD. I'm privileged to be a psychologist, so permit me to respond to the issue about trauma that have been talked about all this while. So if I use an example of people who are victims and the challenges that you see, so you notice that the way we have designed our intervention over time, we are focused more on humanitarian, so basic need, food, shelter, clothing, but we have not really paid or prioritized the issue about psychological trauma and challenges that comes around that. Now, this is what it leads to. But one of the biggest challenges is that once people eat food, what next?
Thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break, and then when we return, we'll come back to the panel to address some of the issues raised by members of the audience. Don't go away. Welcome back. With only a few minutes left before the end of this program, I'd like to wrap up by going back to my panel and asking them to give us their thoughts regarding this conflict and perhaps the most important issues, starting perhaps with Brigadier General Bill.
Thank you. Well, like I will always say, the first thing is that we needed to understand that the fight against Boko terrorism is not the Boko terrorists versus the military, but it is the business of all. And secondly, too, the good understanding of the fact that terrorism worldwide is a global threat. It is Nigeria, it's not just peculiar to Nigeria. And these are issues that cannot be switched off.
I know I'm interrupting, but I have no choice. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. Idayat?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, we are really in a difficult period because we are trying to build peace, rebuilding while there is still an ongoing conflict. But while we are at that, what we must definitely prioritize are the issue of human rights, governance, and rebuilding peace, such that that danger of a well-behaved Boko Haram, we are able to nip it in the bud.
Well, actually, we have in the past facilitated meetings between the INGOs, Borno State government, and the federal government, including the military, in terms of facilitating return back to their communities. Now, in that sense, that has provided a better understanding between all the actors in terms of return, because people do indeed want to go back to their communities, and they must do that out of willingness, not out of force. So in that instance, I consider it a major success because the parties involved are talking to each other.
Okay, quickly on the issue of donors versus people who want to politicize the returns. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that everybody is doing this intervention in good stead. So we should, have more meetings in terms of understanding what each other's mandates are. And that facilitates better understanding, and the people benefit more.
Thank you very much. Dr. Masha?
Okay, I think it's a collective responsibility, and everyone has its own role to play, even from as little as how you present, or you understand, first of all, and then present a situation. If I give an example real quickly about Burma, the initial visit to Burma, I remember there was a story around people dying, mass graves, and that the military was not being very supportive, and a few things like that. Well, by the time we went into Burma and we looked at where people had been put in the hospital, it was the safest place. That becomes their life. That's their reality. So people will die, will be buried. So if you see a grave, somebody has to be buried somewhere. That is where they live. That is where they do everything. So that's their community. So
not mass graves.
Yes. So to spin the narrative around mass graves was not very responsible. And so it's important that we take responsibility, no matter how little it is that we have to do. And also it's a continuous engagement of all stakeholders, and to basically take responsibility. And that way we can build the trust that is required for us to be able to move this forward.
We have run out of time and so have to leave it here. Our gratitude to our panelists. Thank you all for coming. Our audience here and also the audience at home. We also want to thank the Northeast Children Trust Fund, the Nigerian Army, the government of Borno State. Join us on Wednesday, the 3rd of October, for another edition of The Call. On behalf of Channels Television and Daria Media, I'm Kadria Ahmed in Maiduguri, wishing you a good evening.